Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Salty Dog webinar. Tonight, we have a slightly different topic, something we've not talked about before, which was partly because of some of my own interest, admittedly, and others about cruising in the UK and the northern Europe, as opposed to the Mediterranean or the Caribbean. And we're really fortunate that we have Mindy and Reinhardt who are going to be talking to you tonight. Some of you may recognize Mindy, or at least recognize her name. She heads up our shoreside coordinators. Um, so we owe her a lot of debt for the great job they do. But tonight we're going to talk about something more fun than shoreside coordination, and that's cruising in Europe. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mindy and Reinhardt. And again, questions in the chat box. We'll get to them by the end. And I hope you find this interesting. It's all yours.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say hi to everybody, but we're going to go ahead and cut off our video. Just what you said. Thank you. So we're not distracting you over here. We're talking about cruising the United Kingdom and Northern Europe. Right now, we're coming to you from the Netherlands. It's 11 p.m. tonight in the Netherlands. And what we'll be talking about tonight is who we are and what our voyage has been so far. Give you some general information about the United Kingdom and Northern Europe, and then start to talk a little bit more about our favorite cruising areas, the English Channel, Scotland, and then this year we've been doing Scandinavia, which has been fantastic. I hope you enjoy some of the topics we've got to talk about. We are Mindy and Reinhardt, and we were cruising back and forth between the Caribbean and Canada every year, sort of going up and down the East Coast, and aboard Rockhopper, our Caliber 40. And we came over to Europe in 2019. We crossed from the Caribbean to Bermuda to the Azores. And from the Azores, we went to Falmouth in England, did a little bit of cruising, just a little bit before we moved over to Belgium for the winter. And Belgium is where we've stayed every winter since then. And the reason is because we have a very nice marina, the boat is in the water, and it cost us 500 euros, so about $600 for the entire season, for the 6-month season of winter. So Belgium is a great deal, and that's why we keep the boat there every winter. So in 2021, we went down to Jersey in the Channel Islands, spent a lot of time in the southwest of England. Gonna get another map up here. Went to the Scilly Islands, visited London, and in 2022, we went through the Caledonian Canal up here, visited Scotland, came down through Ireland, back through Southwest England, back to London. 2023, back down to the Channel Islands, back up through Scotland. This area was so nice. We just kept coming back and ended up in London again. And then this year we finally gotten up into Norway, Sweden, and the Baltic. And that is just fantastic. And right now here we are in the Netherlands. So we've really been enjoying our time here, and we'll talk about it a little bit. So some general information: when you are coming to Europe at all, you have to think about power for the boat, how you're going to refill or exchange your propane or your cooking gas. And then if you're here in shoulder seasons or for the winter, think about how you'll be heating the boat. And Reinhardt, do you want to talk about how we've done that?
So our boat is just a regular caliber that's built in the US. So we have 110 volts on the boat. So we had to convert it to 220. So what we did is we got an isolation transformer that we installed, and it's an automatic switching. So it would work also in the US if we would, when we go back. So right now I have it wired for 220. And so basically we just plug in and we get 110 on the boat itself. That works very well. It's just like you would plug in your boat in the US, except the cables are a whole lot skinnier and easier to handle. The cooking gas, we didn't do anything there. So the propane, because most of the UK, in the Europe in general, they do exchanges. They take your bottle and give you a new one. And in the US, you usually fill the bottles. So, and they don't have filling stations. We haven't found one yet. So what we did find out is though that they have auto gas, that is propane for cars, and we can fill our bottles there ourselves. So some gas stations are maybe iffy and they don't let you do it because it's not allowed theoretically to put it into a container. It needs to go in a car. But other than that, you know, we have done very well with that. And we converted it to our boat actually to electric stove, meaning an induction. We just bought a very inexpensive induction stove from IKEA in the US and then got it back in the luggage. And so we're using that mainly for cooking, but it's only a one burner induction stove. And for the heating, our boat was already equipped very well with a very nice heating system. It's an hydronic heating system. So it heats a glycol that runs through the boat and has radiators in each cabin. And so that works very well, especially in Scotland. We use it almost every day in the morning to heat up the boat. And also when we're plugged into the marinas, we use our air conditioning in a reverse cycle, and that works very well too. Even right now, that's what we're using right here in the morning and overnight maybe. Go ahead, maybe.
Oh, okay. So once you get over here, guides, you can see there's these couple of guides here from Imre. The channel pilot is for the English channel and Cruising Scotland. But Imre and the reads are available in any channelry you go to over here. And of course, in the UK, they're always in English, but they're also available online in digital format. So that's something you can get beforehand or even when you're cruising somewhere else. So although I still like a paper copy. And then apps. In the US, I was always using Active Captain and the Garmin boating app, or formerly Navionics, has a lot of Active Captain information, which is pretty good, but still using something like No Foreign Land, I use a lot, and Navily to try to look up some of the anchorages or find out more information about harbors. And then websites in the UK, I used Visit My Harbor a lot, which is sort of an old-fashioned website, but it does give a lot of good information about harbors. And then we just found this one, harbormaps.com. Has been really good for Europe in general. So those are some of the apps and websites we've been using. You're not going to meet that many cruisers over here, but everywhere you go, there's local sailors all over the place. Everyone has a boat. Sometimes it's just amazing how many sailors there are in these areas, and they are just a great source of information. So that's the other great place to get your information, is just to talk to people that are out cruising. Locals have great knowledge. So one thing we were talking to Alex about before is the formalities and Schengen and all of that. So I've been getting a lot of my information like I used to from Noonsite, but many times in Noonsite there's the link to the country's website, and I really use that because they're changing a lot of their methods right now and updating to digital formats or something like that. So I usually rely on the country's websites first and foremost. And I will say, because I really am not going to say it too much in the slides after this, but so far with getting into Belgium, that's what we've done that a lot. Whenever we came into a marina, the harbor master can usually call somebody for you, and that's the police that come out, and they're really immigration. We haven't really seen customs in Belgium at all. Checking into Norway, we did that again with the police, and normally they send you out to the closest airport to get your passport stamped. And in that case, when we were in another city, the customs guys just happened to walk by and ask us a bunch of questions. So it's all been kind of relaxed as far
Mhm.
as that goes. But we've been getting our stamps from the police. And that's the same way you can just ask them how they expect you to check out. Now we're going to talk about Schengen. Uh, One thing to think about with everybody tends to think of Schengen and the EU as being the same things. So the Schengen rule is you could say 90 days out of 180 days in the Schengen zone. And these medium blue countries are the EU states that are also Schengen, which is most of them. You see up here, Norway is not an EU country, but it is Schengen, and Iceland also. But that was one thing when we visited Norway. We weren't in the EU, but we're still in Schengen, so it counted as that 90 out of 180. And over here, Ireland is part of the EU, but it's not part of Schengen. So it's you have to take that into consideration as you're traveling. What is actually in the Schengen? Reinhardt and I aren't really as affected by this as a lot of people are because he has an EU citizenship, so I can travel with him. So one thing, and you're wanting to say something, but I was going to talk about the strategy.
No, I just wanted to say that Schengen doesn't apply to us.
Yeah.
Because if I'm an EU citizen, I'm Austrian and I have an Austrian passport. So for us, if Mindy would be traveling by herself, the 980 would apply.
Yeah.
But when she's traveling with me, then that doesn't, and that's 100% of the time so far.
But UK is a great way to work a strategy. You can go spend 6 months at a time in the UK and then do some cruising in Europe. So that is the UK isn't part of Schengen, so that's a good way to work the strategy. You should also be thinking about the VAT, which is that you can stay in the EU for 18 months, but then you have to go, or you would owe VAT, but you can leave for 1 day.
Well,
And that's the boat, not you. So the boat just has to leave the EU every 18 months, for a day. So that's not nearly as hard as that 90 out of 180. If you get over here and you're loving it and you think, oh, I've got to find a way to stay longer, there's lots of other Schengen strategies. We know people who have gotten residencies, visas. We know folks, actually several people who have gotten visitor visas, 6-month visas for Sweden. We met some Americans over here. We asked them what they were doing, and she had a French citizenship that it seems like she had gotten in the last few years. So that's something, if you look back into your family's history, you might actually be able to get another country's citizenship. So that we looked into Ireland for me, but my family wasn't recent enough. So there are lots of other strategies out there, and you can just start investigating those when you realize that you want to stay longer. So that was sort of some general information about the UK and Europe together, but now this is a UK overview with clearing into Britain. I typically do that online now, but they also have a number to call, the National Yacht Line, and you could just Google National Yacht Line, and they are still answering that phone, and it might still be the best way to check in, because several times when I've cleared in online, I've still had to give them a call and did see if they've got the situation. So that you will not get a passport stamp in England anymore, which I really kind of miss. But there's a good chance you're not going to see anybody. Here lately, we don't usually see them except out on the water. A border force boat may come by and then ask us some questions. So That's sort of the way they take care of that these days. We've never been charged anything from any of the countries. There's no fees for checking in or anything like that in any of the Northern European or British countries. So that's been very nice. If you're going to spend a lot of time in the United Kingdom, consider joining the Cruising Association, the CA. They've got lots of great online information and free guides and all sorts of good stuff. We actually never joined, and now we're not spending that much time there. But that was a really great sailing association. All throughout the UK, harbor masters are very helpful. We found them particularly helpful actually up in the Northeast. When we were coming down, there's all of these uh, old fishing harbors that just seem like they're impossible to get into. And we didn't think our boat could go there. And then when you talk to the harbor masters, they're like, oh yeah, sure, great. Come at 3 o'clock tomorrow. And they help you in and catch your lines and it just been great. And then when you're down, we'll talk a lot about this cruising area here, but the harbor masters are very helpful in the South, in the big cruising areas. Down here in the South, summer weekends, you might end up having to raft with people. There's lots of sailboats out there. We had people raft on us on a mooring because that was perfectly acceptable in that area. And again, this is one of those places where you get fantastic local advice when you're attached to another boat. They can tell you all about, the best places to anchor and, where the best grocery stores are and that sort of thing. Have a little thing over here about crossing the English Channel, as we've done that quite a few times, and that a lot of British people tend to think that that's a big deal, and they'll talk about that. Ooh, you're going to cross the channel. Well, you've just crossed an ocean, so it's not that big of a deal for you, but it can actually be pretty rough, and there really is a lot of traffic, so it is something to take seriously. But it's not as quite of a accomplishment when you've just crossed the Atlantic. I think that one of the biggest things about the UK is the huge tides, and that means strong currents, and you have to do some careful planning. And these tides are really all over. But when we talk about big tides down in the Channel Islands, that's 30 feet.
Yeah, 30 feet. Yeah.
30-foot tides, and it's considerable. Because of that, anchoring is a bit different. There are some areas where it's just not possible. They dry out, or or there's just too big of a change for too many boats to get in close together, or you have such a strong flow in that area, you wouldn't necessarily want to be anchored. So we did find some lovely anchorages, but it is quite common to have moorings or just to go into marinas or city wharfs.
Most of those marinas do have floating docks.
Yeah.
So you're not all of them, but
typically,
most of them do have
yeah.
floating
And
docks.
the other thing, well, I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next section. But there are lots of places that we were looking at in the charts, and well, it's not possible for us to go there. That's crazy. It's land. We can't go there. And then you'll talk to a local and they'll go, oh, no, you can go in there, just, not during a spring tide. And those are the things to really talk to people about. And if somebody says, what's your draft? I think you can get in there, just have a serious talk with them, because there's some really lovely places that we ended up going from advice from locals where we just didn't think that was possible. One thing that also comes, yes?
Yeah, when we looked at the charts, it looked like you couldn't get in there, but the charts also give you the minimum depth, so when the moon is right, then you have maybe still 5-6 feet above that, so if you have 2-3 feet of depth at low tide, at spring or something like that, that's what shows on your chart, and then you still can anchor there or go through that channel at maybe 10 feet or so. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. And then the other thing that comes with those big tides is sometimes difficult landing a dinghy in tidal areas. When you're in towns, they have floating docks for the dinghies. That's not really a problem. But if you're in an area that a beachy area or something like that, uh, there is a big difference in tide, and so you need to take that into consideration when you're landing your dinghy, what state of tide it is. But also, you see lots of folks with wheels that can haul their dinghy, really far up the beach. We have a big Caribbean style dinghy with a big heavy motor, and that was just a bit too much weight for us to work with. So we actually have a mooring system. And if anybody's interested in that, asking us questions about it, go ahead and ask in the chat. And if we have time at the end, we can talk about that a little bit because it worked out great. But it's just another thing to think about is how you're going to land your dinghy if you've got, a 10-foot, 15, 20-foot tide. So I'm going to go ahead and start talking a little bit more. Oh, and this was our track over here, which we talked about. We've been all over England. So the English Channel area is the whole southern and southwestern part of England. It also includes actually really coastal France, which we haven't visited, but I'm going to go ahead and make this bigger. These are the Channel Islands down here. Guernsey and Jersey. We've visited both at different times, and they're really fantastic. They have kind of a British French fusion. They've always been British, but they are quite French in a way too. In Jersey, you're almost always in the marina in the main town. And then in Guernsey, there are more anchoring possibilities in these islands. But again, it's quite a big tide they've got down there and strong currents coming in when you're visiting. But it's a really wonderful area to spend some time. They also get you out of the British or EU VAT. They're independent.
Yeah,
They're independent from they're British, but they're not part of the UK, I think officially.
Yeah.
Over here, Isles of Scilly, just part of Cornwall, and part of the UK. They are sort of like the Caribbean of Britain. It is actually, I mean, it's really warm and sunny in all of this area, but they're really getting almost tropical in the feeling with that Gulf Stream heating them up very nicely.
Not so much the water though.
The water's still chilly, I swim, Reinhardt doesn't. But it's a really lovely area. There's a lot of islands in there. And so there's always, a really good spot to get in the lee. But it's not a place you'd want to be with any of these big storms that come across because they're really not very protected. They're somewhat flat. But in typical weather and regular summer weather, they're just beautiful anchorages, maybe a little rolly, but that you're used to that if you've been in the Caribbean this whole time. So I feel like during the summer, all of the British people are trying to work their way there, and we got there at the end of the season when we went, and it was a really nice time. So this whole area, it's the Southwest, it's Cornwall and Devon. These are names that we've got Falmouth is over here, Plymouth, Portsmouth, Dartmouth, just these names you've been hearing your whole life that we have in the US too. This is the Isle of Wight, which is a really wonderful sailing area. And this is actually the main town on the Isle of Wight is called Newport, and the whole place is very Newport. It's very racy and yacht clubby, and it's kind of a fun area to be in the Portsmouth, Southampton area. But we've been going up and down this coast for a couple of years now, and there's wonderful little places to anchor, wonderful rivers to go up. One thing that it is more expensive than, well, a lot of the British people will say it's expensive. I think if you're used to American prices, It's not that bad. We would see, but anchoring usually costs something. It's usually about $10 or $15 that you might be paying to the local community or to a park, if the anchorage happens to be in a state park or something like that. Um, Moorings are 25 to 30, and I would say we probably did a lot of $40 or $45 nights in marinas, but they could go up to 65 at the pretty snazzy marinas or very popular spots. And it is hard to anchor every single night. You end up having to go into some marinas in the area, so that's something um, to think about. But it is sunny and warm as far as Britain goes, and this is where the whole country wants to come down on vacation. So it's a really nice place to be. It is a walker's paradise. Uh, Trails all over the place, beautifully preserved history. There's National Heritage Land, which has all kinds of trails through it, English heritage sites, lots of castles, and there's a coastal path which goes all along the coast, the whole way. So every time you stop somewhere, you can always hop on the coastal path, walk up a hill, and get a fantastic view. One thing that comes along with all of the strong currents and everything, these little parts sticking out here are called heads, and sometimes the weather can be, or the sea conditions right around there can be pretty rough.
Due
So
to the
that's
currents.
due to the currents. So that's something that has to be factored in when you're moving around. But I'm often surprised, because we were always leaving with the current and how far we could get with the day sail. If you were doing a 6-hour day, you could really get some distance and cover some land. But I think that's oh, well, I'm leaving out a big one, London. The first year we did it, we thought, well, let's just see what it's like in London. There's a little anchorage over here. And then when you anchor overnight, you just take the next tide up and you can be delivered to St. Catherine's Dock in London, which is right by the Tower Bridge in one tide. And it's a peaceful, quiet marina right in town, and it was just amazing and iconic. We stayed there for 6 weeks, and then we did it the next year, and then the next year after that. That is expensive. It was usually costing us right around 2,500
7 weeks.
for 6 weeks,
And 7 weeks.
and but it's just a wonderful experience, and we're not going to do it this year, and I'm really going to miss it because London was starting to feel like home for us in November. So it's a really good thing to do. It's a great place to spend winter. There are several American and Canadian boats that do that. So if you're looking for a place to spend winter and you're going to be on the boat, London is a great choice. So, and I'm going to go ahead and switch to our next favorite area, which is Scotland, and Western Scotland in particular is stunningly beautiful, and it's lush and green, but it is bad weather a lot of the time. And the temperatures didn't quite get up into what I consider a summer temperature. We weren't often wearing shorts or sandals. We were more often wearing a fleece, and it tended to be overcast a lot of the time and drizzly a lot of the time. But it's such a beautiful area that uh, we went back a second year to just get more of it. So when we went up the first time, we went through the Caledonian Canal, which I didn't even know about until we really started our research. But this is a canal that goes through from Inverness to Fort William, straight through Loch Ness. No problem taking a mast through there. It was all locks that we had to pass through to get us up into. This is sort of the Highland area, so it's really a beautiful area to take the canal through, and it was really fun. We had Lynn and Mark from Roxy actually came and joined us, and it was a really fun place to have company, and easy to get them back to Inverness for a flight. So that's a really neat thing to do. And then it drops you into the Hebrides, which are fantastic cruising grounds, tons of anchorages, sometimes quite deep anchorages, but there's also moorings available, wonderful marinas, even in these little remote islands. There were wonderful places to anchor and stay. We always had great internet, great cell service. Um,
And actually the sailing is fairly easy because
Yeah.
the
This is kind of
it's
protected.
protected, the area inside, so the seas are not so big. And yes, the winds can be fairly strong at times, but at least the state is not as bad. Some of the areas you can just yeah, I usually don't like to tack into the winds, but we did, because the sea state was great. So we could do that, so.
If you're going to be spending some time in the Hebrides, the Antares charts are an electronic chart that's available from a local group. And that is a really wonderful resource when let's say we were using Navionics the first year, and there was a lot of areas that, well, we just couldn't go into. It just didn't even say what the depth was. And then when we had the Antares charts, they had all of that fully charted out. So there were all kinds of interesting places that opened up for us. And once you get on land in these areas, Scotland's beautiful, but it also has this right to roam, which sort of starts in this area, goes into Scandinavia as well. But they have a different way of looking at private property, but you are allowed to cross people's private property. If it's a farm, you're allowed to open gates and close them behind you and walk through uh, property. And very often, if they've got cattle, they might even have comments about stay away from this cow or something like that. They know people are walking through the property, and it's absolutely expected and fine. Lots of interesting sites, ruins, ancient stone circles, burial mounds, just all kinds of interesting things that we were really impressed by. There's whiskey, distilleries on a lot of islands and in several places. And if you're aren't into whiskey, there's wool. There's sheep all over the place, and they do lots of wool arts, and usually even medium towns have a nice place to buy wool. So that's kind of a fun hobby to work on there. We talked a little bit about the Caledonian Canal, but there's also a little canal in here called the Crinean Canal. This area can be pretty, there's this really strong current running through here. And if the weather's bad, it could be a bad spot to go through. But there's a little canal over here called the Crinean that you can also go through as a masted boat, which is nice. The second year we went to Scotland, we got up to Orkney. We had always wanted to go up to Shetland, which is up higher, and didn't make it. So we thought, okay, we'll go to Orkney. It's fantastic. It was such a surprise. Ancient sites, archaeological digs going on all over the place. Everything was very accessible. You could walk up to just ancient sites that you'd never think you would have access to in other countries, and really interesting war history. The German Navy fleet, the German fleet sunk their ships there right at the end of World War II. So there's all kinds of interesting stories with that as well. So loved Scotland. Absolutely fantastic and worth the rubbish weather. And then this year we've been doing Scandinavia, which was really the whole point of coming. We really wanted to go to Scandinavia. It was the first thing we were going to do. And now we've been here 4 years and we've just gotten here. So what we were really surprised with was we got to Norway. Let me show you. We came from England when we got up here, and we were cruising this area of Norway. And it's just right across from Scotland, yet there's no tides, there's no currents. It is surprisingly protected from the North Sea. So it was really nice sailing in this area, full of anchorages. The weather has been really nice. quite warm. We were wearing shorts and sandals and all of those things that we only got to do a few days before in the last few years. So we were really enjoying the weather and anchorages. One thing is, these are sort of the famous fjords, and fjords are deep. It's amazing. You'll be going right beside land, and you're in, 300-foot water. So, in those areas, of course, there's not a lot of anchorages, when the water's so deep. So there'll be different ways. Sometimes folks have a way of tying to rocks, and it's all sort of a new way of looking at how to do things that we are still just getting used to. I talked about Sweden down here. Sweden has the most islands of any country in the world. They have over 260,000 islands, and has a bunch too. So one interesting thing was when you really zoom in, if you look at your Google Maps and really zoom in on that coastline, you would think, oh, you can't sail in between those islands. That's just crazy. That's like sailing in between rocks. But the charts actually our electronic charts have preferred routes that go right through the islands. So it's a really neat thing to do. It's kind of challenging sailing. It's more of a little motor, but it was a really pretty way to spend the summer. And then all of these islands, there's just tons of little anchorages, and sometimes in Sweden we saw a lot more of it. Club moorings that you may or may not be allowed to use, or maybe you can use them for a night. So those are rules you just have to get used to when you're looking
One
at
more
them.
thing I want to mention though, between July 15th and August 15th, that's when the Scandinavians have their vacation. And most of those places, marinas, anchorages, are very, very crowded. And you think you couldn't fit another boat in there? They fit another boat in that marina. It is just incredible how they,
Pack the boats in.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was really surprised there was always room for us,
Yeah.
and so it was really kind of a fun thing. But I could imagine when we were over on the Stockholm side, over on the eastern side, that the closer you are into a main little touristy city or something like that, especially if it has a marina, probably forget going in there. But as you get into the islands, and there are so many anchorages, that there's always an anchorage you can get to. That's fantastic. We had everything pretty much to ourselves because we were outside of the season. It was still, in the high 70s and sunny and beautiful, but everyone, summer was over as far as the Swedish were concerned. So I talked about how the electronic charts show that the preferred route through the islands. So that's really nice. We so Baltic mooring. So they do this both on rocks and in marinas, but they tend to either drop an anchor off the stern or pick up a mooring on the stern and then go bow in to rocks, because it's usually pretty deep right in front of those rocks, or in the marinas to the dock. And then they have really nice pass-throughs on most of the Scandinavian boats where they could just walk right off the bow. Our boat's not like that. So we were having to find some easier ways to get off our bow. We did stern to anytime we were in a marina. That was like that. And we tended to anchor in places rather than do the rock tying. Maybe next year we'll get a little braver, but we didn't quite get there. We did it once, but we had help.
But most of the reason they do the rock tying and mooring to rocks and stuff, because they don't have any dinghies. So that's the only way they can get to land. So, and these are usually a little bit smaller boats, but we've seen all kinds of different types of boats, and even lots of power boats with and even some of the boats don't even have anchors on the bow. They just have an anchor in the stern. So it's quite
It's
interesting.
it's
Yeah.
it's something different, and we hadn't seen that anywhere. We got to Norway, and it's the first time we're seeing this, and then we saw it the whole summer in Norway, Sweden, and a little bit in Denmark. We didn't spend too much time in Denmark, but the last thing to add is that the anchoring areas are sometimes similar to the U.S. state parks. They have really nice facilities on some of these remote islands where you go and anchor. They have a nice dinghy dock, and they have bathrooms or maybe even showers on shore. They have picnic tables and grills and really wonderful trails to pick up, trash trails, berry picking. It's been a real big treat. And we know now that we're going to spend at least another year, probably 2 more seasons cruising Scandinavia because it's fantastic. We got as high as Bergen on this side. That's as high as we made it up here. And I would really like to get to further north in Norway and further north in Sweden. So we've got some more Scandinavia to do. And this will lead into, but as we've come back, we've come through the Kiel Canal in Germany. So this is the shortcut from the North Sea into the Baltic and back through. And so I'll talk a little bit about inland waterways and canals because we didn't really realize how much we were going to enjoy that. But it's a nice thing to consider in shoulder seasons or when there's bad weather. You could spend your time in these really protected waters. So we are currently in the Netherlands standing mast route, meaning we can go really all over the place in the Netherlands. We're up north in the Netherlands right now, and we'll be making our way to Amsterdam over the next week or so. And then we can continue south in the canals, or we can go around the outside. But in the Netherlands, there are routes where you can do that with your mast up, which is really wonderful. Rivers to large cities, for instance, the Thames to London. Usually, if that large city is close to the water, there's a mast up option for getting to that city before it's then closed in. Actually, right after St. Catherine's Docks in London is where once you go through the Tower Bridge, you can't go any further with a mast. But a lot of cities are that way. So sometimes you can go up a river, get into a city, and it's a great place to spend a shoulder season or the winter. We mentioned the Scottish Caledonian Canal goes through Loch Ness. The way we came from the Baltic to where we are now is through the German Kiel Canal, which was really pretty. It really felt kind of like the inland waterway, the intercoastal waterway. And then we did have some friends that did this in France a few years ago. But if you can't transit canals with a mast, for instance, if you wanted to go through France and go that way into the Mediterranean, they actually have facilities for stepping and delivering your mast. That's sort of a regular thing right on the ends of the canals. So we've never looked into that, but we had some friends that did it, and it just seemed like a really neat way to see Paris and to cut through France. So there are places that have that too. So we've really enjoyed our time on the inland waterways and canals as well. Anything else to add?
I don't think so for right now.
Yeah. So I think that's it with the presentation. It'll just be I think questions and answers now.
Okay, so let's go to the top of the question list. And Sheldon, I hope you guys are okay in Florida. So first question actually from Perfect View was you were talking about some of the places where you're anchoring are deep. How deep is deep?
I mean, some of the places we were in Scotland, we anchored in 70-foot areas because the water is so deep, it goes, and you can't anchor any closer to land because the deepness goes almost to the shore, basically. There are rocks there then. But that's on the rare side. But I would say in the 40 to 50-foot range is the deeper parts. But you can find, like in Sweden and Norway, we always found areas in the 30-foot range.
Or less. I feel like we've always been going 20 feet. But
there are no tides. So that's the
yeah.
that's the good thing, then you don't have to worry about. But in the UK,
That's
or-
why you end up with these really deep
correct. Yeah,
anchorages
yeah.
is because of that tide.
Mhm.
But also, anytime we were in a very deep area, it also happened to be incredibly protected. I mean, like landlocked protected, how we got into some of these places.
Exactly. And you
So
don't
you
have to
really,
worry about
yeah.
dragging so much. It's because just the chain on the bottom of 200 feet or 300 feet, whatever you're going to put out, is just going to hold you in place, basically.
So
Yeah.
we never really worried about it. We were pretty secure.
What type of bottom were you typically encountering?
Well, I could tell you in Scott, I'm the person that is up working the anchor, and most of the time it was that stinky, sticky mud,
Okay.
and
And once in a
hose
while,
off
once in a
mud.
while, a chain or a cable came up too.
Yeah, I think we've all brought that stuff up at one time or another.
Yeah,
Okay.
every once in a while we'll get some nice sand, but that is pretty rare. It's usually really earthy,
Okay.
PD.
peaty.
Um, So were there any areas where you typically would encounter rough seas? Thinking back to all the areas you cruised?
Between
Yeah, go ahead.
between the UK and Ireland, that's the Celtic Sea, and that can be sloppy.
And the channel too. I
The
mean,
channel itself also sloppy.
yeah, it's the problem is the steepness of the waves, because you have the current going 6 hours one way and 6 hours the other way. And you always, when we did it, usually sailed a day and a half or 2 days along the channel. And so you always have some wind against current. And that can get pretty choppy. And around the points,
The
the
heads.
heads, and there we have
Actually, in Isle of Man, we have the worst conditions
yeah,
we've
I
ever.
thought our boat
We got too
gonna,
close.
yeah, or on the chart it said we were outside, but somehow we were not.
We were in
mean,
the rough water.
I mean, I've never seen waves like this in my whole 10 years of cruising now. It was just going up and down and up. I mean, it was just crazy.
And it's
And
what they warn you about. They always say, don't get too close to that point. You're like, 2 miles.
But it's only for
Had to be 5
exactly
miles
just
off.
for a mile and a half or 2 miles, and then it's gone. It's flat again.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the North Sea? Was there any issues crossing there?
And actually,
When we crossed it,
it was
no,
a really nice time.
but it can get really bad. But
Mhm.
we have always planned it very well. It is quite windy, and we got used to it now that
Yeah.
sailing at 25, 30 knots of wind, but usually we time it where the wind is from behind us. So then it's not so bad. The waves come with it, obviously, when it's that windy. But and it's also really fast then, for
Mhm.
us, we're a little heavier boat, and so we like a little bit more wind, but it's
But that's actually where I was really surprised for Norway then, because I was thinking, oh, we're going to get up there and it's going to be really rough because we spent a lot of time looking at Windy, and we were always looking at those colors, that were right outside of Norway. But it ended up being a really nice area. And once you sort of get there, you don't really need to go outside too much. So it'll be interesting when we finally get up further north if we
and
experience.
if you look at the slide that is here right now, you see at the bottom there, I put a little picture in there. I don't know if you see that.
Oh, that's
That's
yeah,
our
that's our marina in
in Blankenberge. We were in the marina, but we had 75 knots of wind.
Oh.
yeah. So that's the North Sea.
And it wasn't really a forecasted storm or anything. It's just yeah, it was crazy. Yeah. So
Okay.
but it can get rough, and you just try not to be out there then, obviously, and we use windy mostly, and so we just time it.
We like our marina in Belgium because it is actually open to the sea. We can leave anytime we want. But a lot of North Sea marinas are actually behind locks. And that's one of those times that it's really nice to be behind a lock because you don't have to worry about, you might have to worry about the winds, but you don't have to worry about the seas coming in.
Or
Okay.
the time.
Yeah.
So in addition to windy, are there any standard weather services that you either listen to or subscribe to?
So that is one thing. The UK has a really nice radio. They have a good website set up. It's like their NOAA. And it's really nice, very organized, and they also do radio announcements of the weather. We have actually not really liked any other weather services much. And I do look at the it was Denmark, I think, had a really good North Sea forecast. But it's been kind of tricky finding those. And the reason I was the most comfortable with the UK because it was most like the US's. We have a really good weather
But
center
we
in the
rely
US.
on windy.
And we do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what we use.
Okay.
But we do use different models here than we necessarily would pick to use in the
yeah.
US. We use the European model a lot and actually the UK model, which is
And
sort of
there's another icon.
an icon.
Yeah.
Those tend to be a little bit more accurate here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Minnie likes to look at gusts
I look at Gust. I
and scare
look at the
herself.
horror stories. Yeah. But
So
right now we're in a canal. We have nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
do you need any kind of either RYA or some other European sailing certification to cruise there?
No,
We
I mean,
haven't
we
had
have
to-
done some research on that and basically even just recently talked to a guy from the Netherlands, and because he sails in Germany quite a bit. And so, and he basically said the same thing that what I found out already. You have to go by the rules of your own country. So whatever you need in your own country, that's what you should have. And in the US, basically, there are not really any, in the US. I mean, in certain states, you have to have certain licenses or whatever.
But there's not a requirement.
But
And
and also the safety. You have to go whatever flares and that kind of stuff that you have to carry on, all about US rules.
Okay. So that's interesting. So it's only when you
And-
go with a charter that I guess becomes more of a challenge, is from what I've heard.
Correct. Yeah, no, this is only for when you're sailing your own boat.
and we have Coast Guard licenses, and we actually showed those to the Belgium safety officers that came out once. And he said, "Oh, this is nice to see." And he said, you don't need these here,
Yeah.
right?" And we were like, so we have not had anybody ask us
Even
for
ask us, yeah.
proof of licensing, proof of radio licensing, and we kept on hearing that we had to have that, and nobody's ever asked. Again, we haven't really seen safety people.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
have barely seen customs.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So another question from Perfect View. Any language differences or any challenges with languages in various places?
So that's one thing I think we've sort of been, well, of course, in the all throughout the United Kingdom, British Isles, of course, no problem. But just like it is in the Azores, nobody in the Azores expects anyone to speak Portuguese. Like it's just not that common of a language. And Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Belgium, no one speaks Dutch. So it's really interesting. Nobody even really expects you to speak it. They all speak English, and
Yeah.
I sometimes feel almost lazy, but
Yeah.
it's
so
true.
no
They speak
no issue at all.
Yeah.
Everybody speaks English.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's good. Of course,
yeah,
it's
so we
embarrassing.
haven't
They
had-
also,
Yeah, I mean, I speak German, so that helped a little bit in Germany.
And we've spent so
but-
much time in Belgium, where we are, is where they speak Flemish, which is
But I
pretty much
do
Dutch.
ask people if I should speak in German or English, because the Germany is right there, and they say
Yeah.
no, English is better.
excellent.
so
Okay.
yeah.
Another question from me. So you mentioned going through these canals with your mast up. Are there any restrictions anywhere on mast height?
So yes, there is, especially in the Swedish and Norway, we had some inland, but I mean, it was sailable, but there were some bridges that you had to go under. And the smallest one and one in
22.
Scotland, wasn't one in Scotland too, that was 18 meters or 19 meters. And you had to do it at low tide. But
Oh,
basically,
yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
65 foot is usually their minimum and higher. But there are some, but they're very well marked on the
Yeah.
charts. And or 22 meters, I saw a bunch
Yeah, I
of
was
them
going to say, I
also.
see a lot of 22 meters. I think that's kind of the
Basically
standard.
20 and 22 meters, and then 30 and 40, and because large ships go through there as well,
Yeah.
to
good.
these areas, and then so there are some, but it's not that common, I would say, that you have to. Otherwise, in where we're now, there are no bridges at all that you go under.
They all open.
They all open. So no restriction with mast
Okay.
height.
A silly
Also
question.
going up
How
to
do-
Thames, there was none.
They were all
No.
big bridges. Just-
How do
Yeah.
how do the cars get across the canal?
Oh, there are
there's lots of
bridges,
bridges, but they have to open.
They open.
Oh, okay, okay.
They're either swing bridges or bicycle bridges, I guess.
Mm.
they're called.
It's actually where we are now. These are really narrow canals.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean,
Mhm.
it'll be interesting seeing what happens when you've got people tied to the side or just on little parks sort of along the side, and then for two ships to pass each other. It's
Yeah.
close.
Which leads me to my last question, which is what percentage of boats are catamarans over there?
Very
Not
few.
that many.
I mean, it's very few. I mean, we saw
Actually, the marina we were just at when we got to the Netherlands, we came into a marina at first, and they had special spots for the trimarans and catamarans that were there. We've seen a few, and when
I
we
mean-
see them, they're massive.
Yeah,
I
I
feel
mean,
like we don't see any regular size.
yeah, there
catamarans.
was
All 60-footers.
yeah, really big ones. Yeah.
And then you just end up going to sort of the nicer marinas. The one thing is that sort of works in that way is that a lot of the Swedish or Norwegian marinas don't have finger piers or anything. It's just one long um, pier that everybody bows into.
Yeah.
And they pick up a mooring in the back, and really you can be any width.
Yeah.
And they just squeeze in.
I
It's
I don't
yeah.
think that it would be an issue at all. We didn't see that many,
Mhm.
but I wouldn't see an issue having one here.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of side ties, alongside, and people raft out 2, 3, 4, 5 boats out, so a catamaran and maybe a few other boats on the side of it, so I mean, we have not seen that, but we've seen pictures of
Yeah.
those, so because we were in Norway early in the season, and then in Sweden later in the season.
Yeah.
Because in the summer we went back to the States for a few weeks, and so we missed that high season in Sweden and Norway.
So speaking of seasons, when do you have to kind of hunker down for the winter? When does that start?
So I would say we do it a little bit later than most people, but what was really driving us, I mean, the reason we were going to London for November is that the days are getting pretty short in November.
You're very far north
And
here,
it's kind of
so
chilly. So you want to run heat, you want to be plugged in, your solar's not making that much. So that's sort of when we were getting to one place where we'd stay for a long time. But we still, in December every year, we cross the channel, and sometimes it's really quite nice. It's not so
It's
bad. It's
good.
not as cold as you would think.
Yeah.
Where we stay in Belgium, it doesn't freeze. It doesn't really drop down below freezing much.
maybe 3, 4 days a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the winter, I mean, yeah.
And even just now when we were up in Norway, there was somebody telling us, oh, you need to stay here for the winter. It doesn't freeze. It stays warm. It's like, this is Norway. So it's interesting the sort of play that you get with the water being.
I think the season is as long as you want it to be, as long as you have a nice heater.
Yeah.
That's basically what it comes down to, because you want to be comfortable on the boat, and having a nice heater makes it, and one that is independent from shore power if possible, like a diesel. And a lot of, as you probably know or not know, but a lot of the European northern boats like Hallberg Rossi, so they all come with heaters automatically installed, and there's a reason for it,
But
so.
I was really confused as to why it's particularly the Scandinavian people, while they were cutting off their summer, while they were saying summer's over. But I think maybe some of that too comes from the same, well, there's also the hurricanes, the big storms that hit the US those, they're not the same storms anymore by the time they get to Europe, but the fall weather can be pretty
Rough.
rough. And I think that might also be the reason. People might just be like, you never know when you're going to have a good weekend and not. We're on the boat all the time, so we can, pick our days and say, okay, we're just going to stay in for a few days. But if you only have a few good sailing days, maybe you probably don't want to spend them maybe at the end of September. You want to go with that July settled weather.
Okay.
But we thought the weather was fantastic, all throughout September.
Great. Does anybody have any other questions? Well, if not, then I'd like to thank both of you very much for the talk tonight. It's been really interesting, very tempting.
Oh yeah, it's tomorrow here now.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. Thanks for staying up late.
But I was going to also say that that most likely right before departure, the Caribbean rally will probably be in Hampton. So if anybody has questions or wants to talk about the way we've done things or the way we've heard that other boats have done things, just ask.
Or just
Or
contact
just
us
send us an
directly.
email.
Great.
We're happy to talk about it. We're loving it here. I
Excellent.
don't even know if we're ever going to go to the Mediterranean. Yeah.
Well, I will definitely, we'll be in Hampton, not by boat, but we're coming down to help. So we'll look for you.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay. With that, I'm going to stop the recording and say